Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining today. I see everyone's just dialing in. We're just going to give it a minute or two here to let people get settled and on. Hope everyone's having a great Friday. I'm currently in our Vancouver office again, and then down to California next week. We're seeing a lot of the trade events pick up again. I don't know for everyone else here if trade shows are coming back online, but if you're at a trade event, let us know. We'd love to come and say hi. We're obviously members of most of the industry associations, particularly in child, baby, maternity, and juvenile, which is the focus of today's Q&A session. It's great to have the CBME show back online, coming on this December in Shanghai. So we're looking forward to that. We've done a number of booths over the years for our clients at the CBME show. ABC Kids recently in Vegas. I know Kinderjugend is back on as well in Germany. So it's been great getting to see many of you in person. Today we're really looking forward to this session again. This is part 5, I guess, of a number of different industry vertical sessions that we've been doing with our CEO Jacob Cooke, who's just joined us as well here in Vancouver. We really enjoy doing these. We obviously work in many different industry verticals, and the nuances of each industry I think are really important. I think brands have a lot of questions about what about our, everyone's really aware of, hey, the macro conditions around China, around the market, around the platforms, but I think there's a lot of nuances to each industry, to each product category that really drives specific questions. And so, being active and having, dozens of brands in all of these categories that we operate on a daily basis, it gives us, we believe, I think, good perspective to share with a wider group. And so whether your organization is entering China for the first time, whether you've had a business there for many years, we hope you get some value out of today's session. So I want to open this up. I want to let everyone know we've got a Q&A portal in the GoToMeeting zone here that you can insert your questions throughout today's session. Like most, we've had a number of questions been submitted in advance that we want to jump into. But before we do that, I want to introduce our Chief Executive Officer and co-founder, Jacob Cooke. Jacob, thanks again for doing this one with us. I think maybe just to open it up, I'd love to hear what you're seeing inside of the category, inside of child, baby, maternity today. Obviously, this has been a long-standing category for WPIC, and have had a lot of success with different brands over the years. So, what are you seeing today? What should organizations be aware of in the category? And what's your outlook towards 2023 here?
Okay, a lot of questions there. Yeah, so Jacob Cooke, co-founder and CEO. Why don't I start with just sort of outlook in general for the macro, and then we can open it up to questions. If you look at one of the categories, it's probably been one of the flatter categories in terms of growth. What we've seen is a general changing of behavior, certainly that was pushing a lot more offline onto online. So we see really still double-digit growth online, but as an industry now, sort of post-baby boom, it's flattened out to sort of single-digit growth across the country. In that, we've seen shifts in behavior more towards organics, things like that, safety, and the individual family, even though there may be the birth rate flat, we still see the category going up because people are spending more on that child. So there certainly is that. But overall, I mean, it's still definitely one of the largest markets in the world, and we still think, an e-commerce D2C strategy is still paying off, for small and mid-sized brands.
That's great. I think it's been such an interesting category, over the last decade with the changes in the child policies right over the years, and seeing the different waves of growth. The birth, the new child rate has been pretty staggering in years past. And I think we've seen a maturing of that from infant to other, age groups, if you will. What have you seen, as the different generations of mothers and parents and their buying behavior in the category. Obviously, the major marketplaces have played a significant role in terms of channel, but what have you seen in terms of relevant channels today in this category?
I think there's, in terms of GMV, we still see Tmall being big. We see JD being big too as well. We think delivery and speed, but it's important to note where those purchases are being influenced from. So we talked about Redbook as being a huge influencer in the space. The demographic skews way more female, which is obviously where the purchasing decisions are made. So, how many of those JD and Tmall purchases actually started on Redbook? Well, a lot of them certainly for new brands and people finding other recommendations from other mothers and what's so important in that category specifically. But we also should be talking about Douyin and the rise of Douyin too as well. It's a category that if you followed sort of the rise of Tmall, what went first was fashion, health and wellness came sort of after that. But then Mother Baby was right there, 3 or 4, and we already see those patterns starting up top with Douyin that Mother Baby is starting to be noticeable, but we'd expect that to rise even more.
That's great. What have you seen? What always interests me, and I think many brands, has been within this category. I mean, when you think about customer acquisition. It's a competitive category, right? There's a lot of brands in this space, both Chinese brands and foreign brands. How important is, just the marketing effort, brand awareness for a brand in this category to be successful? If assuming that they have little to no awareness when they first enter.
The one thing about this category specifically, I think you have the lowest barrier to, let's say, going viral, so to speak, so that when you're out there and you're getting noticed, I mean, how many baby brands in the West, if you want to draw a comparison, became famous because they were seen on Ellen or Oprah, or you name it, some very influential show? I mean, really similar out there too. So as you go through your influencer campaigns, it's not going to take long before somebody of real interest is going to take note. It's going to get out there. If you really have faith in your product, especially, it's going to get out there. It's going to get out there probably faster than a lot of other categories.
That's a really great point. For maybe those of us who aren't familiar with the influencer celebrity landscape in China, what does that look like? What options do brands have? How expensive is it? What's available to a brand, and how do they get involved?
In most categories, it's almost entirely pay to play. I think in this category specifically, you do have a good opportunity for earned media as well. But if you're pay to play and you're starting out, there's good reasons that a lot of brands would do that, but it's extremely expensive. You could be paying commissions up to 30% and still paying for airtime on top of that. So can you reach an audience of 6 to 8 million people? Yes. But it's expensive, and when you really start to make money, the earned media, that's what that's what's going to drive a lot of margin at those days too. So as you maybe consider using them, focusing when you're going into market on that top line, and then slowly converting into a profit-driven enterprise, your earned media is going to really help you with that.
That's great. I want to remind everyone as you're just jumping in here, we've got 20 minutes in this session to really provide insight to your questions, and so I'd encourage you to ask a question at any point in today's session. I want to jump into a few of those right now, if that's okay, Jacob.
Sure.
You talked about marketing, influencers, etc. Within this category in particular, there was a question here on content localization. And the question is, how significant does our content need to change and our marketing assets need to change, to be relevant in this category?
Good question. So we get this a lot. I think I've answered this question 3 or 4 times this week. This is really interesting. So I think this category specifically has one of the lower ratios. So if you look at, a lot of fashion what we do in those situations is actually we just shoot the Asian models for global use. In this particular category, I mean, we might only reshoot 30, 40, 50% of the material, whereas in other categories it could be 100, and most categories sit between the 65 and 75% localized material. I mean, we're still an international brand in most cases, but you know, let the localization experts and listen to them. That doesn't mean we get off brand, it's on brand, but I mean, there's a lot in that decision-making process of what does this look for me, what does this look like for my child, and we need to connect that as best as we can while still being an international brand. So shooting
really important.
babies is tough, but luckily we only need to do that about 50% of the time. You know, interesting note about that. You know, if you're looking into what it's like to shoot with babies, most of the materials that you'll see on our website too, probably 60 to 70%, the mom works with us. So
right.
been on set, so that's made it a lot easier. So just so you know, those are a lot of WPIC babies in our material.
Love it, love it. I guess that's what comes when I think it's what 80% of our workforce is female. That's great. I want to keep going through here. So I have a question from Matthew, and Matthew was just asking with regards to the split in just market between offline versus online, and the question really is like, how important is offline in our entry strategy relative to offline, and just your insights on that.
It's almost irrelevant now in terms of offline. So with the mall closures and what have you, I mean, there was trends every year where online was eating into offline, but it really kind of exploded last 2 to 3 years. The retailers also, you know, and we've worked with them, you know, Red Baby, and there's a whole bunch of chains, but you know, their requests just get harder and harder. Like they want, you know, 70, 60%, and you know, everything on consignment, and in general their foot traffic's not great. So I mean, if you're looking at that compared to an online investment in a new store, new influencer, you're just going to move a whole lot more product through online mechanisms. So we haven't opened up any retail channels for brands. Just the case hasn't been able to be made in this category in like 2 years almost.
Oh wow, okay. Really insightful.
Yeah, that's more heavily skewed to this category specifically, but yeah, there's very little retail action.
Okay. Question here from Emma, just on the commercialization process. So Emma says, hey, we have a new brand. They're not yet in China. And the question is, what steps do we need to have in place, or what resources do we need to have in place before we think about commercialization or launching our brand, and how do other brands handle this?
Well, okay, so a lot of the similar questions kind of, okay, they come at different. So we would look at this too, is that some people now, before even getting into like a cross-border store or opening up a storefront, are testing the waters with social commerce, which means they sell a little bit, but they're more focused on metrics like influence and what people are saying about the product. It's a very low barrier to get something like that up and running, and might be a good test for you to see if there's good traction and if further investment is warranted.
That's great. Do you mind, maybe for those of us who aren't as familiar with the different social media platforms, you talked about Red, you talked about Douyin. I think those are two of the highlights. What other social media platforms are trending in this category and need to be a part of a brand strategy?
Well, what social media is trending towards in general and becoming is short form video and live stream, right? So that's, you know, looking at Bilibili, Kuaishou, etc. I mean, that's where the growth has been. That is, sorry, a little bit of background noise there. That's really what we're focused on, certainly, is short form and live stream. That's, you know, probably 80% of the content, maybe more, that we're putting out today is focused on that. That's certainly where the eyeballs are as well. So that's where social media is going, really. Not that Redbook is out or anything like that, it's still great. But in terms of the content style and stuff like that, a lot of live broadcast.
Video, and more video.
Yeah, that's a good way to sum it up.
Great. I want to keep going through here. So, question on testing requirements from Emil. What do testing requirements look like for products in the baby category, and how does that compare to the US?
Okay, well, we're experts on China, but we'll do the best to answer the question from that point of view. There are testing requirements, and I think I would look at this in two separate ways. In order to go local and import, product by the container loaded and bypass the free trade zones, which does open up more sales channels to you, at that point you would have to go through all the testing requirements. We're talking different for different types of products. Educational tools, obviously different than food, than clothes. So we're happy to take this question a little bit offline and connect you with the people that can discuss about your specific category. But if you look at the cross-border platform as a good stepping stone, then you don't need to be as compliant with Chinese regulations. In a lot of cases, they'll use your FDA in the US compliance certificates to allow you to go live on their cross-border platforms. So that's what most brands do. That's the easier. And then understanding what that path is going to look like. And if there's changes that need to be made, maybe even to the product, you've got a lot of runway there before you go from a cross-border to a domestic structure to get that in order at that point.
Okay, there's a follow-up coming in here on that, just from Dylan on the labeling requirements. How do we handle labeling? And specific to cross-border, are there labeling requirements even for cross-border?
There are, but the 3PL will handle that for you. So that'll all be handled at the warehouse level. And then yeah, we might repackage when you're doing domestic at that point.
Okay, that's great. And I apologize for any background noise. I think there's some construction in the building today. Another question here from Frank, and Frank is sharing, I started a toy brand 7 years ago in the US. Do most kids in China focus their play on computers, iPads, and the digital world, or do they like physical toys? And what do parents prefer?
Yeah, good question. I think there's a lot of talk about too much computer time going on right now. I think also when online learning hit China, it forced kids online more than I think the parents would like them to be. It's been a reasonably small category in terms of toys to what the actual market is, but rising over the years. Not only do parents prefer them, but they're also great gifts. Like you'll see them going in between family members, like aunties to nephews and things like that too. So yeah, in terms of the influencers there, I think offline toys are more in demand than online.
That's great. And maybe just so I know, I think there's always been a lot of discussion around the the different parents and grandparents all focusing that income towards the grandkids and the children. Can you speak to just the buying power and the amount of consumer spending that's going towards this category today?
Yeah, it's a pyramid, right? So if you do have a one-child policy, which has been in place for generations, even with a two-child policy now, as that traces up, you have 4 grandparents giving birth to each one child that get together, get married, and have 1 kid. So you've got 1 grandchild with 4 grandparents and 2 parents focused directly on 1 kid. So you do have a lot of buying power. It's correct.
And is the preference something that brands ask me a lot? Is it true that these parents and grandparents prefer Western brands and they have a higher trust? In 2022, I mean, is that still the sentiment today?
I think that the brands for mother baby are looked at both equally and scrutinized in detail by mothers. I think you need to look at that. So I don't think, foreign in the case of a USA, for example, I think would be highly appreciated, and that goes with certain reputational characteristics with it, you know, mostly that are positive, high quality, safe. The FDA is a well-trusted organization, but you know, maybe not for other parts of Southeast Asia, for example. But again, it's gonna scrutinize. I wouldn't say that there's a preference for one or the other. Things like formula, there certainly is. But you know what, it's going to come down to your brand specifically.
Sure.
What the selling points are and how you communicate that.
That's great. And just, I'll invite everyone to continue to ask questions in the Q&A portal here as we go through. Question here from Melissa regarding what kind of educational toys are most popular? Do international brands, I think kind of follow up to my last question, do international brands have a leg up in the space, or are they perceived as less valuable specifically within that educational category?
Educational games, I think we're seeing a huge boost since, I don't know if you're aware of this, but the online training, a lot of them had their licenses pulled because they were becoming too big of a burden on parents, you know, richer parents being able to buy more tutoring, etc. So what we have seen though is rise in purchases in games which weren't affected. So English language games, IQ logic, these types of things, yes. Seeing a bump in the last 2 quarters in those categories for sure. It's hard to say what they like. It seems that they trend or there's something new all the time. And it's another one that, yeah, if mothers start to pass it along and people see it, it's going to go really well. But, you know, they change. There's a lot of innovation in that category specifically, and it's going to go from half to half in a year.
That's great. Moving on here, there's a question from Michael regarding specifically regarding baby bedding and the approximate percentage of parents that use cribs and crib bedding as opposed to co-sleeping. Do you have any data on that? And then maybe a follow-up to that is, do you know if parents in China are setting up specific nurseries for their kids similar to the US market?
Yeah, good question. So they certainly are. There's a lot when you look at influencers and, you know, OBGYNs that publish publicly, a lot of them now are saying don't co-sleep. Not good for development. I think that's similar to what's been said in the West too. So cribs are becoming more and more prevalent, especially for, in fact, I wouldn't know of anybody that I know specifically who's having babies now that wouldn't be in a crib. I think that's pretty general accepted practice. In terms of bedding, it's a little different because the sleep suit is incredibly popular, right? So I think a lot of the temperature control that goes on is through the suit. Probably people haven't focused typically on the bedding, but certainly I think if there's room for disruption or innovation in bedding and good materials, et cetera, that can actually do that same temperature control, you might stand a pretty good chance. Research specifically though, but yeah, in terms of the nursing crib, that's pretty mainstream now.
Okay. And are you seeing, as the follow-up to that, are you seeing parents set up like a specific room or area as a nursery, or is it?
Unlikely they would have enough space for another room, but yeah, maybe crib in the same room.
Okay. And I know we're only at 5 minutes left here, and so I'll final call out to any last questions here. There's a question from Anthony regarding the importance of medical endorsements of products. Is that relevant, or do you see that within the industry?
It's extremely tough because actually medical professionals that are part of the CMA can't endorse products publicly or privately. So they're not as important and they're very difficult to get. You know, Pampers will have programs in place that, you know, they can use reliable stats and have the money to delve into that, but most brands won't. So it's really going to be mothers that are going to be influencing other mothers.
That's great. Jacob, I want to thank you for all the questions that you've taken here today. What advice would you leave with everyone today as we wrap up here? We covered a number of topics, but what are maybe three things that you're seeing best in class mother baby brands do in China today, and what do brands need to be thinking about?
Well, brands that are innovating, I think that when you look at China and Asia in general, the barrier to entry is just getting lower and lower every year. So now you have social commerce options, you can open up flagship stores, but they're getting easier and cheaper to do. Centralized inventory is also allowing for scalability in Asia quite a bit. So I think you need to understand those concepts and see if there's an option that sort of works for your revenue range and what you're trying to do there, and take a hard look at it. We've been in that area for a long time, and it's provided a lot of revenue, a lot of growth for a lot of international brands.
Outstanding. Jacob, always appreciate your time and you taking the time in your schedule to answer these questions. And I want to thank everyone who joined today for submitting these questions. It's really insightful and great for us to hear from you guys. And so if you want to get in touch, you can email myself, peter.mcmath@wpic.co. You can learn more about our organization at wpic.co. If you have any questions, we'd love to hear from you, or reach out to Jacob or I on LinkedIn at any point. Thank you, and have a happy Friday and a great weekend, everyone.
It's great doing these with you. Thanks very much.